Week 4 of the fantasy football season. Here's tight end sits every matchup this week. Thursday Night Football, Dallas Cowboys at the New York Giants. Jake Ferguson coming off a monster game after he missed the Week 2 ball game with Ferguson versus the Saints. He's a must start this week. 6 catches, 95 yards on 11 targets. And tight end position's been very weak this season and a lot of underperforming players, especially Travis Kelce, Sam Laporta, Mark Andrews, 3 of the top 5 tight ends coming into the season. So Ferguson back in the lineup. The Cowboy offense started getting going late in that game. And Ferguson last season was great with Dak Prescott. And this week, I think he's going to put up good numbers at a weak Giant defense. Theo Johnson, Daniel Bellinger, they're both sits. Johnson last week almost had a touchdown. But besides that, he didn't do much in that ball game for the Giants. And he's a rookie that possibly could come on later on the season. But he's not showing much now. He's a sit. And Daniel Bellinger, backup tight end, he really hasn't done much as well. He's a sit. Cincinnati Bengals at the Carolina Panthers. Mike Gesicki, he's emerged the first 3 weeks of the season as a decent option in the passing game for the Cincinnati Bengal team. And right now he's top 8 in fantasy points at the position. So this week with a great matchup at the Carolina Panthers. Mike Gesicki definitely gets a starting nod for me. Eric Cole Jr., they're very impressed with the rookie is a Cincinnati Bengal team, but a lot of mouths to feed on this offense. Obviously, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Mike Gesicki, Andre Azavas has definitely stepped up as a third wide receiver over the last few weeks. Eric Gore, we got to see more volume and more snaps before I would have confidence putting him in the lineup. Tommy Tremble, Jatavion Sanders are both sits, but this offense definitely has improved with Andy Dalton. At least he could get the football down the field and make plays where Bryce Young pretty much couldn't do anything at all, but we have to see way more out of Tremble and Sanders for one of them to be starting options. New Orleans Saints at the Atlanta Falcons. Foster Moreau, Jawan Johnson, Taysom Hill, all sits for me. Foster Moreau, the number 1 tight end in snaps since week 1 for this team. But pretty much they haven't used the tight end position at all is this New Orleans Saints team. Besides week 1 where Monroe and Johnson both had touchdowns, they've been quiet ever since. I know this week could be a potential shootout at the Atlanta Falcons, but no one's going out there and trusting, especially Monroe and Johnson in their lineup. And as for Taysom Hill, he missed last week's ball game versus the Philadelphia Eagles. And even in the first 2 weeks of the season, we didn't see much from him versus the Carolina Panthers and at the Dallas Cowboys. So even if he does play, he's a sit. Kyle Pitts, he's a start, even though the numbers haven't been great. Like I said, this tight end position is so weak that if someone's scoring 7 to 10 fantasy points weekly, they're most likely a top 7, top 8 tight end right now in points per game to start the season. So Pitts and Kirk Cousins, they're working on rapport. And last week, Pitts went out there and had a mediocre ball game. Jacksonville Jaguars at the Texans. Evan Ingram possibly could return in this game, but we haven't seen anything at all season from Evan Ingram. After last year, he came off over 100 receptions last season, but this week he's a sit, even though they definitely could use him in this one. I want to see if Ingram does come back, if he's healthy, and if he's going to get targets and make plays. So I would take a wait-and-see approach. If he returns, he's a sit. Bretton Strange, he's found the end zone 2 weeks in a row. And if Ingram's out, I think he's a borderline option in Strange, because this most likely will be a game, once again, where Jacksonville is down early and they got to drop back and throw the football 45, 50 times. So if Strange is in there as the starter, if Ingram's out, he's a borderline option. Dalton Schultz is a sit. And I've said this for weeks now with Nico Collins, Stephon Diggs, Tank Dell, and either Joe Mixon back out of the backfield. Dalton Schultz is the 4th or 5th option on this offense. So the targets aren't there. The route runs haven't really been there. And like I said, when you're that 4th or 5th option, you can be very inconsistent and not a fantasy option. Denver Broncos at the Jets. Greg Dulcich had the goose egg last week. Dulcich is still trying to get back to 100% healthy. I think he's not 100% after the injuries last season. But Dulcich's a good talent, no doubt about it. But this offense is very inconsistent, and really no one on this Denver offense you can trust week in and week out as a start. So Dulcich is hit. Tyler Conklin finally came on with a monster ball game last week, and we'll see this week if he gets targeted once again in this passing game healthy as Tyler Conklin. So last week a big game, like I said, for Conklin. Still out there in tons of fantasy leagues. And let's say you got a Mark Andrews or you're an Evan Ingram or Sam Laporta owner where both those players are banged up. I think Tyler Conklin is a decent option this week in a beatable matchup versus Denver Broncos. So he's a back-end tight end. Minnesota Vikings at the Green Bay Packers. Johnny Munt, I know he found the end zone last week on a 2-yard catch at the goal line, but he didn't do anything else besides that. So he's not a tight end getting volume. He's not making plays, not getting targets. he's an easy sit. Tucker Kraft, Luke Musgrave, I know Jordan Love's coming back to the lineup. That definitely gives a boost to everyone, even though Malik Willis played good the last 2 weeks. But Love most likely back, and he likes targeting the tight end, but I would take a wait-and-see approach with both these players before I put them in the starting lineup or even own them on my roster. Pittsburgh Steelers at the Indianapolis Colts. Pat Freiermuth, every week he carves out a top 10, 12 point per game option is Pat Freiermuth. Is the number 2 target in this passing game for Pittsburgh. I think Pat Freiermuth most weeks is going to be a start, and this week in a grinded out matchup at Indianapolis. In the starting nod, Kyle Granson. His whole offense as a whole, besides Jonathan Taylor, hasn't really done much this season. So Anthony Richardson, it's either him spreading the football out to 5 or 6 different players or him running the football where no one's getting good volume or putting up enough points. So Kyle Granson, an easy sit this week. Los Angeles Chicago Bears. Colby Parkinson's a sit the last 2 weeks where we thought he would get more targets and put up more fantasy points. It hasn't been the case with Colby Parkinson. And this week, a tough matchup going to Soldier Field versus Chicago Bears. He's a sit for me. Cole Kmet broke out with the monster game last week. And now the Chicago Bear team, they're going back to basics and trying to make it easier for Caleb Williams at the quarterback position. And now with Cole Kmet more involved, we saw last week a monster game, 10 catches, 97 yards, and a touchdown. Volume like that is tough to find for any position, especially the tight end position. To get 10 catches and 11 targets is impressive. And I don't think it's just going to go back to early in the season where the numbers weren't there. So Cole Kmet, after he wasn't even on the radar at all, back on the radar. And he's one of the top scorers at the position after coming off a monster game. Philadelphia Eagles at the Tampa Bay Bucks. It looks like both A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith have a good chance of missing this game. And Dallas Goedert last week, what a performance, and most likely the best performance you'll see at the tight end position all around the league this season. 10 catches, 170 yards for Goddard in that ball game. So he catches over 30 yards for Dallas Goedert. He's got good hands, still a good route runner. Not the quickest of tight ends, but he's got a good IQ. And like I said, he can make plays and stretch the field for this Eagle team. So with A.J. Brown and Smith possibly out, that's just more targets. And once again, good fantasy option and most likely a top 5 option this week for Tampa Bay. Cade Otton finally had a good game, over 9 fantasy points in PPR leagues, but consistency hasn't been there. And I have to see a little bit more out of Cade Otton. If he goes out there once again as a decent performance, then he could be in that borderline option weekly. New England Patriots at the San Francisco 49ers. Hunter Henry's a sit for me. I just can't trust anyone besides Ramondre Stevenson in this offense, even though last week he had a poor ball game as well. The Henry, a monster week 2. Week 1, he didn't do anything. And last week, Hunter Henry at the Jets didn't do anything at all. So this week in a tough matchup at San Francisco, I can't trust him. He's a sit. George Kittle, we'll see if he returns to this game. And if he does return, especially with Deebo Samuel most likely out, once again, George Kittle's a top 5 option at the tight end position. Eric Stolbert played 61 snaps last week. No impact. It was the Juwan Jennings show. And if George Kittle's out, I don't see Stolbert doing anything in this passing game for San Francisco. He's an easy sit. Washington Commanders at the Arizona Cardinals. Zach Ertz playing good this season for this Washington Commander team. And I always say it in my videos, a young quarterback's best friend is the tight end position. So Ertz 2 weeks in a row, 8 or more fantasy points in PPR leagues. And the way he's performing, that's big numbers compared to other tight ends who have done nothing. So Zach Ertz, I think he's a back-end fringe option and borderline option this week to the Cardinals. Trey McBride's a start if he could pass the concussion protocol test. We know he's a good route runner. We know he's one of the better tight ends in the league. And Kyler Murray definitely trusts him, so he's a start. And if he is out, Elijah Higgins, I just don't see the volume of the targets being there in this ball game, even though it's a great matchup versus the Commanders. He will be a sit even if McBride's out. Kansas City Chiefs at the Los Angeles Chargers. Travis Kelce, it's definitely worrisome and time to panic for fantasy owners who are Kelce owners. We haven't seen much out of him at all. Only 15 total points in 3 games in PPR leagues for Travis Kelce, but I still would roll him out there. He's obviously not going to be a top 5 option, but this week versus a team going into Los Angeles where he's got a great track record versus them, I think Kelce wouldn't be surprising to me if he finally breaks out, even though he is the number 2 option now in this offense behind Rashee Rice. Now to the Chargers, Hayden Hurst, Will Disley. We haven't seen much out of them all season. And now if Justin Herbert doesn't start in this game, I don't see anyone in this passing game doing much regardless, even if Herbert started. So Hurst and Disley, easy sits for me. Cleveland Browns at the Vegas Raiders. So David Njoku, we'll see if he's going to play in this game for this Cleveland Brown team. And if he does, I will put him in the starting lineup. Week 1, he looked good versus the Dallas Cowboys. In the last 2 weeks, he missed ball games with David Njoku, but he's one of the more athletic tight ends in the league. And he definitely will give a boost to this Cleveland Brown offense with Deshaun Watson's been struggling all season. So if David Njoku plays in this game, it's a great matchup at the Vegas Raiders. I would start. If Jordan Akins fills in once again for David Njoku, if he's out in this game, he's not going to be a start. The last 2 weeks, he hasn't done much. Is Jordan Akins. Week 2, he only had 2 fantasy points versus at the Jacksonville Jaguars. And then last week versus the New York Giants, decent ball game, 6.90 fantasy points in PPR leagues. But he's in one of the worst offenses in the league. He really hasn't done much, and he's someone I can't trust in your basic 10, 12, 14 league formats. Brock Bowers is a starter. I know last week the numbers were down a little bit for Brock Bowers, but he's already one of the better tight ends in fantasy football, especially points per game for Brock Bowers. So far this season, 7 or more fantasy points, including 2 double-digit fantasy games. This week, with a middle-of-the-pack matchup versus the Cleveland Browns, I still believe Brock Bowers could go out there and have a good game, and for the most part, him and Gardner Minshew have a good rapport. Sunday Night Football, Buffalo Bills at the Baltimore Ravens. Dalton Kincaid, the last 2 weeks, he's had decent weeks. Week 2, 7.10 fantasy points. And then the last week, he found the end zone with 13.10 fantasy points in PPR leagues. So it looks like he's the number 2 target in this passing game behind Khalil Shakir for this Buffalo Bill team. And Dalton Kincaid last season came on in the second half, had over 70 catches. And so far this season, I know tight end position's been bad, but he's been playing better than most tight ends, is Kincaid, so he's a start. Now to the Ravens, is definitely a problem with Mark Andrews this season. Last week, he played the third least snaps out of the tight end position. Even Kolar played more snaps than Mark Andrews in that game. He only had 1 target. It was a goose egg. He didn't make a catch. And going back to week 1, he didn't do much either, is Mark Andrews. So this tight end room in Baltimore is not consistent and not making plays. And Isaiah Likely, week 1, he had the monster performance. Everyone ran out to the waiver wire and picked him up, and he hasn't done anything since the last 2 weeks. So this week in a tougher matchup versus one of the better defenses in the early going. Both these tight ends are borderline options. They're still most likely going to be in most people's starting lineups. I'm going to lower expectations this week. Monday night, first of 2 games, Tennessee Titans at the Miami Dolphins. Not much going on in this one. Chigga Kongwo 2 seasons ago had some late fantasy value, but this season he hasn't done much in the early going. Josh Wiley last week did find the end zone, 4 catches, 43 yards, and a touchdown, but we need to see more out of him to be a fantasy option. So both those tight ends are sit, and Jonnu Smith, pretty much no one in this offense I've mentioned in other videos besides Devon Achane and Tyreek Hill really have week-to-week fantasy appeal. So this week, Jonnu Smith is sit once again in the final game and second of Monday night. Seattle Seahawks at the Detroit Lions. Noah Fant had his best game of the season last week in the victory. 6 catches, 60 yards versus the Miami Dolphins. So this week, tougher matchup at the Detroit Lions. So far, they're decent defense, middle of the pack. And Noah Fant's still the 4th or 5th option in this offense behind DK Metcalf, behind Tyler Lockett, Jackson Smith-Njigba. And then I think in that passing game comes Noah Fant. So this week, even with a decent matchup, like I said, he's a sit. Now to the Lions, Sam Laporta. He was the first or second tight end taken off the board in fantasy leagues, and he just hasn't lived up to expectations, and now banged up with an ankle sprain in Sam Laporta. So we don't know 100% if he's going to play. And also, it's a Monday night game, which could be tricky for fantasy owners, where if he's a game-time decision, fantasy owners are going to have to wait to the end or just bench him this week. But if he plays, you're going to start Sam Laporta. He hasn't been as bad as Travis Kelce, but the numbers haven't been great, like I said, at all. And I think it's part of Jameson Williams getting more targets this season, being a number 2 threat in the passing game at wide receiver. And also, I think it has to do with teams rolling more attention to Sam Laporta. So with all those factors, that's why I think the numbers have gone down. But still, if he does play this week, he's a start. And Brock Wright, if he fills in for Sam Laporta this week, he's a sit for me, because Brock Wright, he's had opportunities in the past, really hasn't done much with them. And this week, even if he starts, I don't think he puts up numbers as well. That's tight end start sits for every matchup for week 4 of the fantasy football season.